Of March 22nd is in session. Change the agenda. All right. First item is PDOs. And Dan and I were chatting this morning, and I thought what would be good is to have Jan give us a brief overview of PDOs and where they have been used and whatever else she wants to tell us.
She'll probably say it, but tell the people out in TV land what PDO stands for.
PDO is a Plan Development Overlay. We have conventional zoning, which is the regular classifications like R1, R2, R3, B1, B2. And then we have plan developments, which is a different type of zoning. PDOs are overlays that only apply to the classical zoning categories unless you're in a TIZ, which is a transportation improvement zone, which is a half-mile radius from our two light rail stops.
Correct. Okay, now where do you want me to?
You have a pointer?
Well, I didn't know if I had to point at anything.
Okay.
So I always bring my pointer. But
Anywhere you want to.
where do we stand? Okay, well, I'll stand here. This is better. Yeah, I
Need
was,
a chair?
Jan, do you have your
do you want me to, can you hear me? Well, the little red light isn't on. Oh, can you
It
hear me
just
now?
needs to be up closer.
We can hear it anyway.
Can you hear me anyway? Okay.
Yeah, but people on the TV might not.
We can hear
Should I sit down or stand up?
It's up to you.
Okay, I think I'd rather sit. Sorry.
If you want to sit, grab one of these.
Yeah, actually, this might be better because it has a microphone.
Over here? Okay, that sounds good. And then I'll use that microphone.
That has a microphone. in it.
Okay. I know.
I'll be banned. Whatever you want.
Well, I don't know if that's even necessary. We'll find out. Well, the plan development overlay was in the zoning code before I came to work at the city, which is over 20 years ago. So it was in place long before we got the transit impact zone. It was used mainly to allow some more flexibility in certain circumstances for development. Typically, it was used when there was some challenging topography or floodplains on property that made it difficult for, just like a straight zone district development to occur. So most of the older plan development overlays we have in the city actually applied a lot more to some of the single-family zoning properties. We have some single-family developments out in Littleton that used this as a tool because they had a major drainage way running through the property or a floodplain, and allowed them to develop the property at the maximum density the underlying district allowed, but they were able to vary lot standards that the standard district required, making some of them smaller than the minimum requirements or adjusting some of the setbacks to account for the floodplains or the drainage way that was involved, or this funky existing street condition or something. And so most of the older PDOs we have are single-family residential. There's one off of some of the newer ones that we had in the recent 10, 15 years was, for instance, there's a development on Watson Lane that's on the east side of Watson Lane that had a drainage way through there and had to modify some of the setbacks. And then there's another one over, well, actually it's property that the city, I think, recently acquired for open space, but it's off of, it's north of Littleton High School, off of Washington and Powers, or I think you might be familiar with that. There was a major floodplain there.
Clarkson.
Yeah. Right, that one. And that was also a PD overlay because of the floodplain on that property. And then the commercial one I'm aware of, I'm not sure it's the only one we have, I think it is the riverfront property, which EchoStar occupies now. And I'd have to defer to Jim Taylor. I don't know exactly why that has a PDO on it, except it's a very specific PDO with, it's actually divvied up into different building envelopes, and different uses are permitted for each different envelope and some standards. And I don't know if that had something to do with the Riverfront Authority. And do you?
it. It had to do with the the developer wanting to put the size buildings on there he wanted to do.
Oh,
For
okay.
the entire project, the whole 30 acres.
Oh, okay.
So it went in as a PDO.
Okay. And so that's kind of what PDOs are originally for. And then we have a couple of zone districts that use the PDO overlay. One is the T transitional zone district, which most of our T-zone we have in the city is along Littleton Boulevard. We have a few other little pieces here and there lurking. And that transitional zone district allows residential and some commercial uses in it. And of course, it's a kind of it's what it says it is. It's transitional. It provides sort of a buffer between residential and then commercial. So that's why it's used a lot along Littleton Boulevard, because of the residential that's behind those first, pretty much the first row of properties along the street. And it, for any property or any development that's a new construction or new building that's commercial, it doesn't apply to single-family residential in the T district, but anything that's commercial in the T district, if it's involving a new structure, they have to get a plan development overlay approved. And that was to take that development proposal through a public hearing process so that it could be evaluated better for impacts that commercial development I have on the residential that's next door. And then another zone district we have that uses a plan development overlay is the CA district, which is a central area district, and that's mostly downtown, and that's what the Riverfront PDO is on, but that's mostly the downtown area, the central area. And this is even before the TIS, but the plan development overlay was used in the case development wanted to increase the density. This is kind of funny because one of the major standards in the PD overlay requirements is it doesn't allow the underlying zone district density to be increased. I mean, they can tweak the lots and the setbacks and that sort of thing, but they can't exceed the maximum allowed density in the zone district. The CA district has an exception there. Under the regular CA district, you can't have more than 75 units per acre. But if you want to increase it to 100 units per acre, but not more than 100 units per acre, you can do so by a plan development overlay. But there's some stipulations there. You have to increase the open space to 20% from 10%. You have to have at least, I think, 25,000 square feet of property, and there might be another catch in there. So the CA district uses a plan development overlay to allow them to do a little more intensive development on properties downtown, given the fact that they traded back with some more open space and had a certain size property to begin with. So that was all predating the TIS. And then the TIS, when the light rail stations came to play, council created the transit impact zone around the station site and Mineral, as Doug mentioned, and the station site downtown. And I think there was a lot of concern that with the stations, lots of redevelopment could occur, and a lot of it could fall under just administrative review. And I think there was a lot of concern that we need to be sure these are reviewed under public hearing process. And so, kind of as a quick reaction to that, I think it was decided that the plan development overlay would be used as that tool to regulate the development and have it go through a public hearing process. And so that's why we do PDOs in the TIS, and that's the majority of all the PDOs we've had in the last 10 years or so have been because they've been in the TIS. So where's I going to go with that?
Jan, I'm going to ask you to slow down and go back a little bit.
Okay, that's fine.
PDO is designed to be used in some way, shape, or form where traditional zone districts are too cumbersome, deemed inefficient, or ineffective. Could you just spend a few moments explaining traditional zone districts and where do they come from? And I know we have a list of, I can't remember, it's 15 or so that fit in those categories. Mm-hmm. You don't have to describe all of them, but you might describe some of the types of them.
Okay, well, we have different zone districts that follow basic same categories. We have the business district, and we have 3 of those districts that are straight zoning. And we have residential districts that go from single-family residential to multifamily. We have 3 or 4 single-family residential districts that mostly differ because of lot size requirements that each of those districts have. We have, I think, about 3. We have an agricultural district, strictly agricultural district, and then we have about 3 residential agricultural districts that are basically larger lot, single-family districts that allow some agricultural uses. We have industrial districts. We have I-1 and I-2, and we have IP district, and we have one of our business districts, B3, is sort of a business into light industrial type district. So we have those 3 districts, and then we have the central area district I described, and then the transitional zone district, and these we refer to as straight zone districts. They're the code actually identifies each of these districts, establishes minimum setback requirements, minimum lot size requirements, permitted uses for each of those districts, building heights, minimum unobstructed open space requirements, just flat out straight requirements for each of these districts. So those properties that are in these districts have to comply with each of those requirements depending on the zone district they're in. We have back in the late 70s, well, this predated me, of course, we had like PUD districts, I guess, out there. In the late 70s, our code changed to change all the PUDs to what we call Planned Development District, which is a little similar to a PD overlay, except for it's actually a zone district and not an overlay. And the Planned Development District is broken into 3 categories: residential, commercial, and industrial. And the Planned Development District actually, when council reviews, well, the requirement with that is a planned development plan is created by the developer, and it establishes the uses, it establishes the zoning specific to that property. It has a list of permitted uses, it has all the design requirements and criteria, setbacks, the building heights, and all these can be different than what the straight zone districts have. It's what's being proposed. And the reason for the Planned Development District is to provide a couple of things. It provides a little more flexibility for the developer than the straight zone districts provide, but it also provides a tool for the city to use in mitigating impacts that development could have on adjacent properties or the city or whatever by creating bigger buffer areas or other setbacks or some different unique things that aren't addressed in the straight zone districts but would be addressed on this planned development plan. And this is actually a document that's recorded after it's approved, and it becomes the zoning for the property, and it goes with the land. And so that's what a planned development plan is. And that's more of our more current zoning cases have been planned development plans. Our comp plan actually recommends any infill, since we have since we're built out, we have properties that are mostly infill when we're doing rezonings, and so our comp plan actually recommends that planned development be used as the zoning tool there because of the ability to address and mitigate negative impacts a new development could have on the surrounding built area. That answer your question, or is that
So far?
so far? Okay. So anyway, the plan development overlay became a tool to address development in the TIS in the downtown area and down south around the mineral station. And the 2 exceptions, property that's single family or already zoned plan development that lie within these 2 TISs are not required to go through PD overlay. And I basically only had 1 PD overlay down south in that TIS because all the property down in that area is either single family or it's PD. And I actually had to do a plan development overlay on the Carson Nature Center Solar Classroom Edition because it's zoned A1 and it's actually in the TIS. So it's kind of a strange thing. But most of our activity, of course, has occurred in the downtown area TIS. And And I did do, I don't know, I did bring, I don't know if you're interested in this, I did make copies of our application packet we have for plan development overlays, and this applies to whether it's the old type overlay we did for a single-family development out in the other areas of town, or if it's downtown, and it also has a kind of an instructions and application and a little bit more of a synopsis of what the code says that I think is a little, hopefully is easier to read for people. And then it also has and it explains the review process here, and it has a checklist of what's required to be submitted in the application, and this is what we give to applicants. So I went ahead and made some copies for you all, if you're curious. I also brought a little case study. I actually presented this to the Planning Commission, if you're interested in this, because they've been in their downtown plan. They've been working very hard on the R5 neighborhood because they've had concerns about that. And so back in October, I just did I did an explanation to them about how the residents at Nevada Place went through the process and how that was approved and why and all that, and they seemed to find that pretty valuable. So I brought that information if you all wanted me to go through that to just kind of give you an example of a PDO that's being processed down in the TIS that went through the Planning Commission review. Is that?
Thank you.
Would you want to do that? Or would you want me to do that? Okay. Okay.
Would like to, Jan, before, maybe I could just make sure I'm understanding it. In what is a traditional zone district, there's a term that's referred to as land use characteristics. And when we hear that term land use characteristics, that has to deal with lot size, the use that would be if we're talking residential, commercial, or industrial, other provisions that might impact adjoining properties or adjacent properties, like setbacks and building heights and things of that nature. So am I getting that part right?
Yes.
Okay, so in a traditional zone district, that's set for those zone districts.
Correct.
Right. And then plan development overlay comes in, and is that now an overlay within a traditional zone district, or is it something separate?
It's an overlay within a traditional zone district. For instance, like this property on Watson Lane, it's actually zoned RE, which is a rural estate district, and it still continues to have that zoning. But there's an overlay zone that's been applied to it and recorded. So in order for a few of the lots to be a little smaller than what the RE district allows, and also to allow if there's about 3 or 4 houses in there that have a little smaller setback situation than what the RE district allows. But that overlay is a recorded document that's part of I mean, the underlying zoning is still the RE district, and the uses that are permitted are still what the RE district allows. But the PD overlay has modified some of those development standards of that district.
So if I'm understanding it correctly, what the plan development overlay allows for is within a traditional zone district to create, to some extent, a subzone that has in aggregate kind of the same land use characteristics but allows for variances, and to get to a PDO or an overlay to get it to the point where it's recorded, there's a public hearing process that will allow for that.
Correct. And that's to the Planning Commission.
Yeah. Why wouldn't they just do a rezone? There's a public.
Well, that's an excellent question. It is.
Why we're here tonight?
And it's, well,
That's the central question.
that's, yeah, I mean, like I said, the PD overlay has been in the code for a long, long time. And and as you know, if you had like property that the zoning would allow you to do 5 lots on, but you couldn't meet all the minimum setback requirements on a couple of the lots, or the minimum lot sizes on some because of the floodplain or whatever, you could go through the rezoning process. But there's a couple stipulations of the rezoning. You might have a piece of property that can't go through the rezoning process because it's less than 180,000 square feet, because we do have a requirement in the code that basically to prevent spot zoning, that you have to have 180,000 square feet if you're not able to attach to an adjacent district. So if you had a piece of property that had this little problem with it, and you couldn't meet that 180,000 square foot rule, then you could do the PD overlay to accomplish those modifications. The other thing is that the rezoning process in itself is much more lengthy. It takes a longer time to get through it, and you're going to through the Planning Commission and to the City Council. So, if a developer's looking for, getting his project through quicker, and he meets the criteria of a PD overlay, that's obviously the option they're going to choose. So, we haven't had very many. I mean, I came here in 1990, and I've been processing almost all the development applications in all these years, and I've had, there weren't very many already in place when I came, and I think I've done, let's see, and this doesn't count the TIS, this doesn't count these PDOs we've done in the TIS, but it's about had like I probably processed 3, maybe 4 PD overlays, and they've all been single-family residential developments, and it was all a few setbacks that they didn't meet. And if it's, and if a developer is looking at his project and it's like, he just can't meet, like one lot can't meet the minimum lot size, or 2 lots can't meet a couple of setbacks because of an existing situation out there on the land, the PDO gives them a quicker option to get through a development approval than taking a whole rezoning just for a few modifications like that. So we really haven't had many of those. I mean, there's probably was a few in place when I came here, and I've only probably 3 or 4 I've dealt with since I've been here for that. And
just to help me understand, in the PDO process, that's generally being done when there's new building that's occurring. It's not looking to repurpose existing either an element within a zone district or something.
no, it's been the ones I've had. They've had like in fact, the one on Watson Lane and the one out on Clarkson and that one there, they all each had an existing home on the property because it was part of a bigger tract. So we've had an existing home to deal with, and in some cases they kept that home.
But for the most part, they're trying to divvy up property or...
Yeah, I mean, I had one on Peakview that still hasn't sold, but there was 3 old structures on that property and an existing public street right-of-way that was dedicated but not built yet. So they had that to deal with. So that was one of the reasons why they had a PD overlay on that. So that's been the purpose for that. I don't anticipate a lot of those. I mean, we haven't had that many of them. They're kind of a special circumstance situation, and given, I think I was talking to Doug today. The only place I can kind of envision that case still occurring might be like down in Shady Croft or some of the residential areas that have like big lots that may want to. They have some situation going on where they've got to use it, but. Lately obviously it's been more used as the TIS tool. So, and then and we've had, and the only one we've had really in the T district that had to go through PD overlay had to do it for both reasons. It was in the T district, and it was also in the TIS, and that's that Littleton Station project. So.
I have a question. In my district, District 2, we have some homes that are what the folks up there call mega homes, big ones.
Mm-hmm.
They'll buy up 2 lots, and they'll build a huge house. And they're very concerned about that because there doesn't seem to be a hearing to face off with these people. And so I don't know what the answer to that would be, other than the fact that if you got enough money to buy 2 lots, you can change the character of the neighborhood and It's no problem.
Well, that's the straight zone district, because it only has a minimum lot size. So if they buy 2 lots and combine them, they obviously meet the minimum lot size, and if they can meet the building setbacks on all those property lines, they created the 2 lots, then that's it. I mean, as long as the thing on the big lots, well, on the structure is the open space requirement. I mean, they're still required to maintain 50% unobstructed open space. So if their backyard and their landscaped area and their patios meet that, then they can build that. And so that's the way the straight zone districts are set out. There really isn't a way to manage that. I think you'd have to probably, put maximum square footage limits. I mean, right now, the residential districts don't have any kind of limit or a maximum or minimum on the square footage of the house that can be put on the lot. I mean, we have some PD plans, some older PD plans that have that. And that was done for, 2 reasons. I've seen them done where they had a minimum square footage put on, and that was probably most likely to establish some kind of value of the homes that would be built in that development. And then you could also have maximums put on if there was a concern about, bulk and mass or something on the property. But for right now, for just the straight zone districts, the way our code is written, there's no way to regulate the size of the houses.
But a PDO, if you apply a PDO on a single lot, which you said it doesn't have to meet the minimum zoning size.
Well, it doesn't have to meet it doesn't have to meet the minimum lot size. That's one of the variations a PD overlay can grant.
So you could put a PDO, you could create a PDO for a single lot, use the PDO to get rid of the minimum unobstructed open space and use that as a mechanism for putting a larger house on a lot than what the standard zoning would require.
You'd have to make a case for
It would have to make a case for it. Yeah.
But
Get your microphone.
Yeah.
I guess my problem with the PDOs are the standard zoning classifications set building heights and unobstructed open space and the setbacks and all those things like that. Those are in the zoning categories. To get a zoning, you have to go through a public hearing that goes through ultimately through the city council. Then what you have is a PDO that allows you to change the building heights, the unobstructed open space, the lot sizes, the setbacks, the lot widths, and in commercial, the parking requirements. Basically, the PDO is a mechanism to change almost all of the criteria that's in standard zoning categories without having to go back through a regular rezone that goes back through the city council. It stops at the planning commission. The only thing they can't change is land uses in a PDO. Although it looks to me like you could limit land uses on commercial properties.
You can limit uses, but you can't add uses that aren't already permitted.
Yeah, so a property owner could have, and the way the land uses work is there's a table in Chapter 3 that it's a matrix that has the zoning categories across the top and the land uses down the side, and then for each zoning category you have the checks of what the land uses are. So you're granted those land uses by the virtue of going through the zoning unless you get a PDO in the downtown area, and then land uses compatible with existing uses can be used as a criteria to deny the PDO. But on the other hand, if it's a CA zone, then you can increase the density. So to me, none of this makes sense. I mean, if you're going to have zoning and you're going to have a process to do zoning, then have zoning and have the process to do the zoning. If you're not, then don't. But the other problem is PDOs are used for two different functions, and Jan talked about that. The first function is to modify standard zoning. And my opinion is those types of PDOs ought to go to the council for final approval, just like a regular zoning. That allows the citizens to come down and talk about any subject that they want to. It makes it done by ordinance, allows a referendum to happen. All the stuff that happens with regular zoning. The second function of PDOs is to provide some level of control in TIZs and transitional zoning categories. And that's really a very separate function from the overlay to standard zoning classifications. And so my preference would be to split up the function of PDOs to say that what we now call a plan development overlay only applies to standard zoning categories, and it has to be approved by council, just like a regular zoning change would be. And then to create a new category of what you want to do in the TIZ. That's not a PDO, it's something different. It's a TIZO or something.
Was the TIZ originally was created so that in the area of mass transit, there would be probably a high density. That's correct? In that area?
Well, in theory, in theory, the PDO can't be used to change density, although in CA zones,
It can, and that actually predated the TIZ, so that was something envisioned before the TIZ.
I think the reason it's in the TIZ is because Jan thinks it so it goes through a public hearing.
Well,
process.
it's go through public hearing, because I think there was concern about when the transit stations came in, there would be a lot of redevelopment occur and interest downtown, knocking buildings down, and there was a lot of concern about that. So they wanted to be able to, allow development to occur, but to have it, reviewed more carefully under certain standards. And that actually even, the downtown design guidelines that we have now came long after that. So for a few years there, that was the only tool to really review development downtown outside of just the typical site development plan that went through the Development Review Committee on a staff level. So
But unless I'm misunderstanding the PDO, in a planned development, you don't actually have to turn in building elevations or materials or much of anything. What you have to do is show the land uses, which you can't modify in a PDO except you could take away some.
Well, actually, for commercial plan development plans, you do have to address architectural style materials.
Okay.
It's just single family, you don't have to do that in.
Just single family or residential?
I think just, look, I think it's just single family. Single-family, types and colors of exterior building materials for each structure or group of structures except single-family detached residential.
Okay. So they have to show the types of material and what else?
And colors of exterior building materials.
Types and color of exterior building materials. But they don't actually have to show you the building.
No, we have, some do, some have done it that way, and others have just, they've listed some design criteria, Yes. So.
If the public hearing or so focuses on what's the impact. going to be, does the review process or the overlay process with the public hearing allow for saying, hey, we need to actually see more?
Yes, yes, it does. I mean, it's the same with the plan development and zoning you're doing. You know, if you feel like more needs to be addressed on the plan to mitigate, impacts or to solidify more. I mean, the one thing about the plan development, plan zoning, it ties that development to that land. So if that owner that got up there with all the pretty pictures disappears and somebody else owns the property, they have to follow that zoning plan that was approved by the council. Otherwise, they have to amend it. And with the exception of few allowances for administrative amendments, amending the PD plan hauls it back through the public hearing process with council. And a PD overlay is the same thing. I mean, if I'm taking a PD overlay to planning commission and they don't feel like they've addressed the concerns, or there's a part of the downtown design guidelines that they didn't address appropriately, they can table it for it to come back at another date with that addressed, or they can turn it down. And there's criteria in the code on approving PD overlays. And if one of those criteria, they don't feel like they have met that, then they can deny that criteria. They can deny the PD overlay, or they can table it, give the applicant an opportunity to come back and address it before they make a final decision. So,
Bruce, so make sure I'm not sure. I think I heard what you said. I'm sort of cogitating on it, but I guess there's no timeline on this stuff. I mean, you can, if you wanted to go through a PDO on a particular piece of property, you could do it, and then as conditions change, you could come back and do it again 2 years later.
well,
Is there a timeline?
Well, there's a little bit of a timeline. If a PDO is approved by the Planning Commission, it has to be recorded within 12 months of that approval. Otherwise, it loses its approval. It reverts back to what was before.
Wait a minute, say that again. It has to be approved.
If it's approved by Planning Commission, the PD overlay document has to be recorded
Okay.
within 12 months of that approval by the Planning Commission.
So just by way of an example then, for the sake of an argument, say the Marathon property, that was actually what, a PDO or a rezone?
That was a PD. That was a rezoning.
rezone.
It's got the same time limit on it. I mean,
Okay,
like
but it was recorded.
it was recorded, so now that's there.
Now, if they wanted to come in and do a PDO, it would just go through planning.
They can't do a PDO because it's a plan development.
Yeah.
You can only do a
Okay.
PDO
On
on
straight
standard
zoning.
zoning stuff.
That's where I was missing. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and they
That was
can,
my clarification.
to answer the other question, they could come back and do another PD on Marathon, and then not build that, and then do another PD.
But it had to go to the council because
That would have to go to the
true rezone.
council.
Yes.
That's a true.
Okay.
I mean, I have an example of a PD overlay now on the property on Berry and Prince Street. It's called Wilson Crossings. It was approved several years ago for a 4-story residential building there. That got approved. It got recorded. So that PD overlay is still in effect on that property. Well, then I had a buyer about a year later come in with another PD overlay to do a senior facility there, an independent living facility. That got approved. So that got approved, but they never recorded that. And a year has now since passed.
So it's reverted
So now
back.
it's reverted back to the other project that was approved prior to that. So, but once it's been approved and recorded, it's there. I mean, they come in and build it as long as they meet the requirements of that plan that was approved.
What's involved in that recording, Gene?
The recording, it's the PD overlay is very similar to a PD plan as far as being a 24 by 36 plan document. There's signature blocks on it, and it basically you got to go through the they go through the approval, they submit the Mylars of the plan that gets the signatures on it, and then they record it at the county clerk and recorder's office. I mean, the staff records it. I don't trust them to do it. So, it comes to us, and I get the city signatures after the owner signed it, and then we get it recorded.
So it has to come from the property owner?
Yeah.
So someone could say, hey, I need to get this done and reset for the property, start to work with the owner, but then not follow through on the acquisition.
They can do that. I mean, when they come in with an application, and a lot of them are this way because they usually have a contract contingent on a rezoning or PD overlay. And so you oftentimes have a buyer as the applicant, but they have to submit a sort of written certification from the property owner that they've consented to this application. And so, and then I have several PDOs and PD plans that have, sometimes the transfer of property occurred before the recording of it, sometimes it's done afterwards, but the legal owner signs the document.
Didn't I know what's happening with Lexon?
Yeah, that actually, because the Trammell Crow is going through that transaction, yeah.
Yeah, I'm willing to see it. Taste it.
Okay.
So I'm trying to remember what happened with the property at Aspen Grove that was going to be condos. What was that? Was that just standard zoning?
Well, that Newton property, the Aspen Grove, is zoned PDI. So when it was annexed into the city, a plan development plan was approved for that, and it was zoned PDI. And
for the whole thing?
for the whole thing, the
those-
shopping center where the apartments are being built, one of the lots that RTD acquired for their overflow parking, that was all Newton property. That was all. And then Aspen, the buyer for the big piece in the front, came in and did an amendment through city council to kind of move the road and some of the plan area lines so they could do the shopping center. And that went through a major amendment and went to city council. And then several years after the shopping center was built, I'll back up a little bit. When that property was annexed and zoned, the front area was zoned for retail. There's a whole huge list of uses, R&D, a lot of uses listed, industrial uses on that piece. And then the piece in the back, 17 acres that Wood Partners bought, that actually was zoned for office. And so when the shopping center came in, they actually did come through council and got a major amendment approved so they could tweak some of those areas around to build the shopping center. But the remaining piece in the back still was under different ownership, and that still remained office. And then that got purchased by Quadrant Properties, and then Quadrant Properties came in with a major amendment to City Council to amend that zoning from office to the residential, the multifamily residential use. And that went through a major amendment through City Council.
And so then McStain was going to build there, but then we had the recession, they went bankrupt, and that fell through. And so then it was just zoned for residential, and now the new people.
Well, the PD plan amendment established development standards and requirements for that multifamily residential. And McStain had it under contract with Quadrant, came in with the site development plan. We were in the middle of reviewing that when everything started going south, and along with a few other projects, and they left. And then later on, Wood Partners went under contract with Quadrant to put multifamily residential there. But they had to adhere to all the same standards that was approved on that plan that McStain was building under.
Okay, and the assisted living on South Broadway, that was just zoning with an intended project that also went south with the recession?
Well, that property actually had a T-zone on it and an R2 zoning on it. The old office building that's there is in the T district, and the back of that is all R2. And then Spectrum had that property under contract to do the assisted living. They came into council and got a rezoning from R2 and T to PDR approved to do the assisted living. So that was recorded and everything. So there's a general plan out there approved for that. Yes, they ended up going away. But that plan is recorded and goes with the property. Now, new owner has come and purchased the property that wants to do assisted living, It's a little bit different facility. It's one story. It's not as many units, and it's actually an Alzheimer's facility that they want to build. And I think that's still in the works. I haven't talked to them recently, but they bought that and are subject to building it under that PD plan.
Okay.
Now, they want to go lesser number units, and they're one story instead of two stories, but see, they can do, the code allows some flexibility that way, as long as they're not increasing the density or they're not increasing the building heights of the PD plan.
So that one
Yeah.
has the PD, but the other one didn't, so they have more flexibility to do something different out on Aspen Grove?
No, they're both the same. They're both the same. They both have the existing PDs that got approved. And that's the thing about the PD, versus the straight zoning. If like with the Spectrum property, they came in and rezoned that property from R2 and T to R5, and R5 allows an assisted living facility, and that Spectrum said, oh, we can't do this after all, but they zoned the property R5, and then they've left. Well, somebody else could come in and go, well, I'm going to buy this R5 property and build an apartment building. So that's the thing about the PD. The PD actually set that zoning specifically for that property, and it goes with the land. So if Spectrum goes away, the other guy coming in either has to go through a rezoning process again, or he builds it per that zoning that got approved. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you.
And want me to go through this little case study? Okay. Well, I'm going to pass out a little comparison chart I did that compares the approved PDO of residents at Nevada Place with existing R5 zoning that's there, and then attached to that is a section out of the PD overlay code. And then what I also did is there's an attachment handout that's got the downtown design guidelines and standards that the development met. Oh, this is mine.
Come on.
Go come around.
Thank you.
It's not so good.
Oh, actually, here. Yeah,
Do you need a copy?
no, I kept one for myself.
So do you want to give us the 50,000-foot version of the story first and then take us through it? Or are you going to take us through it?
I was just going to take you through it.
Okay.
Okay. Well, as you all know, the residents of Nevada Place was a former school site for the St. Mary's Elementary School downtown. So it was already two big parcels that had one side of the east side had the school building on it, and the west side had the playground on it. And also the east side had another single-family house just to the north of the school that also was acquired by the developer and combined into this development. So I did this little chart here that gives you the existing R5 zoning and then the approved PDO. And for instance, so for primary uses allowed, the existing R5 allows single-family residential, multifamily residential, group homes, nursing homes, and it also allows medical and dentist offices as well. The approved PD overlay is only for residential multifamily. So under this PD overlay, the only thing that can be built there is the residential multifamily. They can't put a dentist office in there.
And so this is an example of where the PDO can be more restrictive.
Correct. As uses go. The R5 zoning requires it requires that at least 25% of the property be minimum unobstructed open space, and the approved PDO stuck with the 25%. They didn't ask for a variation on that. The building setbacks for the R5 district, the minimum side setbacks on the north and south property lines are 5 feet and 10 feet, and for a corner lot side street it's 10 feet. And for the Nevada Place, their north setback was 10 feet, which exceeded the R5 district. Now, they asked for, as you can see, they asked for variation on the south side setback in order to make allowances for some bay projections at the intersections of the two streets. And then on the front setback, the R5 district requires a 20-foot minimum front setback. And this was another area that the Nevada Place asked for a variance on, was on this, allowance for 17-foot, 6-foot-inch setback, also to allow for some raised patios at the grade parking exterior wall and some projections at the corner units. And I'll kind of go over that again a little bit on the next page. On the rear setback, the R5 requires 20 feet, and Nevada Place actually exceeded that setback on the rear. Then the maximum height required in R5, or maximum height allowed in R5, is 30 feet. And this was another area that Nevada Place asked for variation, and that was with the height, and they asked for 43 feet. The maximum density allowed in the R5 is 77 units for this size of site at 43.45 units per acre density. Nevada Place actually asked for 68 units, which was less than what they were allowed, and a lesser density of 38.4 units per acre. Parking requirements for multifamily is 1.5 spaces per unit per our code, and they provided 1.95 spaces per unit. So the two areas they asked for variations is the building height and some of the setbacks.
Jan, probably somewhat of an unfair question. In the areas where they're asking for a higher degree of restriction, constraint, than what might be in the existing zoning, it's kind of looking at trying to drive through an overall character, recognizing they're asking for some other variances that go on the other side. Is that right?
Right. Well, they were creating a bigger setback where they were adjacent to some single-family residential homes, and so they were asking for a little shorter setbacks along the streets. And part of that has to do with the downtown design guidelines. So I can kind of get into that a little bit because in order to meet some of the downtown design guidelines, one of the things is bring the building close up to the street, provide activity along the street, provide architectural interest and character of the building, and bringing strong corner elements to the corners of the buildings, and that's what the setback variations allowed. It allowed for projecting bay windows and little porches and some of those architectural features that made the front of the building more interesting in character. Shortening up the setbacks at the corners of the streets, they're allowed for more stronger corner elements to be placed at those corner sections. And then in relation to that too, the downtown design guidelines also recommends that you don't have parking as a predominant feature of a project. And so they put the parking underground in order to place that underground, and it's pretty well concealed. You look at that building and you can't tell there's a parking garage under it, unlike several that you can. Well, that put the parking down about half a story, which caused the building to have to be raised up a story. So that was another reason why they requested the variation on the building height. So, a lot of, that's kind of, and I explained that, and that's how that got approved. They provided quality materials. They addressed a lot of, as you can see in the handout I gave you, a lot of the guidelines and objectives and standards of the downtown design guidelines for this neighborhood. And in order for them to do that, they were granted these variations with the setbacks and the building heights. Because to build a project just straight under R5, an apartment building or something, you would probably be looking at a very plain, flat roof, building without any architectural interest or any character to the street. And so, in order to provide all those things that our design guidelines require, they asked for these variations. And so that's basically how that was approved.
In that, on the second sheet, first item 1, under section 1095 of the city's zoning ordinance, how did we define or identify substantial benefit to the city?
Well,
Depending.
yeah, it's subjective. I mean, it's,
Well, yeah, but with this project, for example, since it already is existing, what was that subjective stuff?
well, I think it was just based on the design, the quality of materials, and the, well, like for instance, the first time that project came in and staff looked at it, I mean, he had a nice project proposed, but it didn't meet the character of that neighborhood at all. I mean, we were talking masonry walls, and it was a great brownstone project.
Yeah,
that would have,
I remember,
Yeah,
because I
okay.
attended DRC for
Yeah.
that whole
And-
thing.
And it didn't meet the downtown design guidelines at all for that area. And so he had to come back in with a complete redesign that had the more of the lap siding and the pitched roofs and the materials that's more character of that neighborhood. So,
So in one sense, the quality of the building that could have been there, that could have been, if they had stayed within
well,
the requirements.
there's a couple things. I mean, you could have gotten a developer in there that was going to build the least expensive, plain, basic apartment building that he could build, and
Without any variance.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, the R5 district allows some variation on the height anyway, except you have to, in fact, the R5 district just itself, without the PDO, can allow you to raise the building up a foot if you take the setbacks in a foot. So you can actually do some of that just with the R5 district. So without the downtown design guidelines and the PD overlay process, with the TIS, 10 years ago, before we got those two tools in place, somebody could have come in and built a very plain, simple, square box, flat roofed apartment building downtown. And there wouldn't have been any criteria that they had to follow other than meeting the setbacks and the building height requirements and the density and open space. And but then we have these two tools in place, downtown design guidelines, so the builder brought in this first project, which was a brownstone brownstone project. It was nice looking and it was quality materials, but it didn't fit the character of the design for that neighborhood. So he came back in with a redo, and this was built.
But
But
we're getting a little off subject, but maybe not off subject. And the reason why it became different is because of the interaction between the developer and the DRC.
correct.
I mean, they brought in the original plan, the DRC said, well,
Doesn't meet the-
we're not real happy with that, and the going back and forth between the DRC and the developer is really where most of the modifications happen to these properties. It's really the interaction with the DRC and the developer where this stuff takes place. And then the final result of that is what comes before the Planning Commission for the PDO or on a PD plan, because you have the same process that happens on a PD plan, then that final version comes before the council. But there's a lot of give and take that goes back and forth between the developer and the DRC during that process. And that's why you get something that comes in as one type of thing and comes out at the end of the process as something very different and hopefully something improved.
That was the process when I was on DRC, when we first came, architectural design was a little bit out of our realm, and that's when we solicited Civitas to come in and give us suggestions and ideas. And you've been to those meetings, and it's pretty lively discussion, and it's pretty, I want to say everybody's trying to anticipate or understand where council might go, what have we heard in the past of what things they might be interested in, and then our own, professional with the architect person on there. So it's a very lively discussion.
I mean, at Lexington, for instance, that was a real different looking when they first came in. I mean, that was a very
Well,
basic apartment development, all tan, and
well, it's the same thing with Aspen Grove. I'll
Yeah.
never forget that one. They came in with a very, very flat, plain-looking, functional building, and I remember that's when.
And we have the South Platte River Corridor design guidelines
Yes.
for that property.
Right.
And with those guidelines and the help of our consultant, in fact, Dick Farley and I have been out there. In fact, we're going to be going out there in a couple of weeks to do paint color review again. So, it's been very helpful having a design consultant because it's making a huge difference, I think, on how things turn out. And it's part of the DRC review and his assistance with his expertise on design and color too. So,
Yeah, this is a good discussion because my understanding of the law as far as zoning is concerned and how zoning gets set and how rezoning can occur, and PDO is all one thing. But when you start getting off into the design guidelines, in particular for downtown, it's sort of completely something else. And I guess, what I was going to ask, and you can answer whatever you need to, but when the design guidelines were implemented, what was the oversight approval process, and how often did they get reviewed, if ever? Because if we're going to put theoretically a brownstone in, you could argue it's not compatible with what's there today, but that as something that maybe could have gone in that potentially changed added an element that maybe would be desirable in the area. I don't know how that gets factored in.
But I think part of the question is, would the brownstone have matched the design guidelines?
It wouldn't have.
No.
It clearly wouldn't have, but could it have been constituted as something that would have been desirable in its own right to use as maybe a centerpiece for changing the guidelines?
well, when they developed the guidelines, a lot of neighborhood input was received during that process. It wasn't just something that the design consultant and the planning commission
So the planning
just
commission
approved.
approved
Yeah.
that.
Oh, yeah. Well, back when they were done, the planning commission approved it. It was done during a lot of, outreach meetings and public input and everything, and what we want to see in our neighborhood and stuff. And he was very good at he, along with the planning commission, was very good at looking at what the existing character was. You have these small houses with flat siding and pitched roofs, and to put a flat roof stone building in the middle of that didn't work. And now see the downtown design guidelines is actually divvied up in 8 different sub areas, and the Main Street is a whole different. They have some real basic similar guidelines throughout all those sub areas.
But other than
They've got
the-
some major key ones that are different. Like the Main Street's got a different one. Sub-area 8 is over where Littleton Lofts was approved, over by McDonald's off Church Street, and that was a former industrial neighborhood, so they've got different guidelines there. In fact, Lexington didn't fall into any of those. We actually used Sub-area 8 to look at their design because that was an industrial property. So,
But I think this is interesting, though, by virtue of the fact that the zoning is one thing, but so much of what actually gets built has less to do, to a certain extent, with the zoning and much more to do with the design guidelines.
well, that's the benefit of the guidelines,
Okay.
because before we had any of those, before we had the South Platte River guideline, when I came to work here, we didn't have any guidelines for anything. And so pretty much the criteria that DRC had to review a development project with was it being compatible with what's next door. Well, if you got some ugly cement building next door, that's what you're being compatible with. There wasn't any criteria or any direction at all on what they should be reviewing and approving as far as how a project looked. And it was difficult because you had the developer in here, you wanted to do it this way. DRC really didn't have a whole lot of meat leg to stand on to require them to do something better. It was personal taste things, which is really not good.
No, I appreciate that.
Yeah, so the guidelines not only help the city see their vision and what they want to see there, but it also gives the developer, they appreciate knowing what the rules are up front.
Totally understand.
Yeah.
But are the design guidelines part and parcel of, for example, the downtown plan? Is it part of the comp plan or the CA plan?
Well, not in our present comp plan we have today, because our present comp plan
So
we
the-
have today predates the
No, I
downtown design
understand.
guidelines, yeah.
But I guess ultimately, what's the oversight for the design guidelines? I know what the oversight is for the zone. Is there any oversight for the
Well,
design?
the planning commission's working on the downtown plan, they've been working on, they're looking at those guidelines along with that.
Bruce,
Yeah.
are you asking what's the oversight for creating and modifying the design guidelines, or what's the hook that you use for applying the design guidelines?
Or the oversight question?
Okay.
You're going to have, at least, Jan, help me on some of this, but I know that the Historic Preservation Board has an effort that's going on in establishing design guidelines for.
Just the district, though? Yeah, no, I agree with that.
And so that's one piece.
Yeah, because they weren't happy with just the main street design guidelines being applied.
Craig or any other speaker over there can jump in on this, but I believe there's a plan for the Planning Commission is going to review those to be included in the downtown area plan, as well as some additional design guidelines that aren't addressed in the historical district. Craig, since I heard you talk yesterday, help me on that.
Actually, the way the downtown area design plan is being developed, it's making recommendations to review the design guidelines to be consistent with the plan, but they will not become part, at least right now, part of the downtown plan. They're separate and distinct, but the recommendation is to review them.
Who? Planning Commission?
That's a good question. Well, ultimately, the Planning Commission will review any changes to the design guidelines, but that's initiated, I imagine, by the DRC.
Is that what you guys, is that right, from your standpoint?
This is a little frustrating. I thought DP, they have sessions.
Yeah. They had,
What'd you say?
they were both jointly adopted by Planning Commission and Historic Preservation Board, so they had to go back to both of those boards. Amendments to them.
And I'm trying to remember, something came before council, but I don't remember if it was the change to the ordinance for PDs to reference the design guidelines, or if the design guidelines actually came to council themselves.
Well, the code actually does for PDOs reference, I'm sorry, I was thinking of something else when you asked the question.
Yeah, because that was like in 2005 or 2006, and I don't remember if it was the design guidelines themselves or if it was simply the change in the PDO to reference the design guidelines as one of the criteria that came before.
Well, right now, the PDO, the code requires that a PDO comply with the downtown design guidelines. There's actual language in here to
Yeah.
that effect.
Yeah, and that's what I'm trying to remember, if it was just that language that came before the council, or if they
But,
actually...
we
never been adopted by council.
Okay, so it must have been just that language.
And we apply though, even if there's a project downtown that is in one of those sub-areas that doesn't require a PD overlay, we still apply the design guidelines to those. Even, our zoning official, she gets sign permits downtown all the time, and she looks at those design guidelines to make sure that the proposed signage that's going into a shop that's not even under a review process is meeting the design guidelines, so.
Well, council, do you want to discuss this more, do you want me to make a motion? We can always discuss it after the motion.
Well, I do have one question with the process that we have. Jan and/or others could maybe comment on this. One of the things that zoning and development and all that has as a purpose is that if someone's looking to develop, whether it's build or modify property, that they have something that's predictable, that doesn't have ungodly costs necessarily, and that some timeframes can kind of be established. I know we're going to get to some of the permitting process of this, but from what you've seen, does the PDO work to be something that is, and I guess that's from beginning to end, when it goes from design review to through hearing, and that, does that work for developers?
I'm not a developer, so I don't know what they're saying, but it's a shorter process than if they have to go all the way from planning commission recommendation to a city council approval, because it's it can be a 3 to 4 month process. When they come in and have a pre-submittal meeting with the staff, we go through the process with them and give them all the application materials and explain the process and what they're required. Also give them and talk to them about the design guidelines so they know up front what they need to look at, base their design of the project on. And in some cases, we even get the city's design consultant involved in some of their preliminary reviews to kind of help keep, from, like for instance, you can get somebody clear down the road with this architecture, they've got all this engineering done, and then, this isn't right. So we try to get some preliminary reviews accomplished under the design guidelines with our design consultant earlier on too, so they're not spending a lot of time with an engineer before they got this looked at. So I don't know.
And my second question, knowing that the first one might have been unfair, is the second one is from the professional staff's perspective, does it work for the city?
Well, I guess it works for the city. I can see there's some problems with it.
A little cumbersome, I think,
It's
yeah.
cumbersome. It's a little bit confusing because lots of times they submit a site development plan with the PD overlay plan, and I know that's become confusing to the planning commission a number of times on what are we really reviewing here, and that also gets a little cumbersome with the applicant. They get a little bit confused with that. There's some modifications that I find are a little interesting because one of the modifications they can request for the PD overlay is parking, a waiver to parking, yet the criteria in which to evaluate and approve that parking waiver has nothing to do with parking. It's got to do with, what the project looks like, the building looks like. So I personally find that kind of a little odd. So there's certainly some things within the process that I'm sure could be, reevaluated, and that's what council wants us to do. As with anything, the thing is that the PD overlay I feel like it got put in as a tool quickly because, the transit was coming, we got to do something quick. And so we're using this PD overlay as a tool to review more carefully at a public hearing these development projects. Well, there was still some problems even within that amendment that came in. We re-amended the code again to address some things that weren't addressed the first time around with that proposal. So, you go back and after you've worked with something for a few years, you can see some more little problems with it that need to be straightened out. So
then the third question becomes, if the PDO process were eliminated, does that help or hinder each of those questions?
Well, if it were eliminated, then you'd be back to an administrative staff review on these projects, which would simplify the process and I'm sure make the developers happier. I don't know, without a public hearing involved, if you would want to change the PDO process to eliminate some of the modifications that the PDO now can grant, like the building heights and things like that. So I think if you were to change the process, you may want to change actually what is allowed to be, modified within that process.
From the planning commission, I'm speaking for myself and not the entire planning commission, but somebody who's been on the planning commission and has reviewed the downtown area and had firsthand look at the PDO process, the TIZ, and all the zoning districts that are within the downtown. My comments are specifically for that area, so I don't want to confuse that with the PDOs and the TIZ and other parts of the city, because I don't feel comfortable making a comment to that. But my experience has told me that based on where we're going with the comp plan, we recognize that the thoughts that were prevailing a number of years ago for the TIZ and the PDO and upping the densities and modifying, if you will, the restrictions that were currently under the underlying zoning. After reviewing all of that, I have to say that I'm not really crazy about the PDO process. Now, saying that means that you just can't say and stop right there, because there's other problems. We have discussed this, that the R5 in and of itself as a zoning category is very difficult in the downtown area, because the existing R5 is a single-family residential area, and has been that way for the last 40 to 50 years, maybe longer. That also being said, you have the CA, which is also a very, very generalized zoning district, and either you fit into it or you don't, and it too has its own problems. So one of the things that I've been pushing for personally, even on the Planning Commission, is to try to look at the existing PDO for the downtown, look at the existing zoning classifications that we have done, using the comp plan as the guide and leadership, if you will, of that, to move along and change those particular zonings so they reflect more of what's in the comp plan than these zoning categories, these straight zoning categories that have been around for about 50 years. And that's the bigger problem. They're just obsolete. And I think, I think that what the mayor was talking about of trying to get, more onto the city council's agenda, and you're right, you could just do a PD and you would take care of the whole thing and bypass the TIZ and the PDO and all that other stuff. It's just one of those things that's out there. I think it's had a good longevity, but I also think it's time for a change in that arena.
Do you think that the TIZ actually is beneficial?
I don't believe that TIZ is beneficial any longer in the downtown area, because if anything was going to occur with the depression of the railroad and the railroad coming and the light transit coming in and people coming in to do a lot higher densities, we're talking about a bunch of different things. I think from my standpoint, I haven't seen anybody really come through to do a lot of major requests. And to be honest with you, I'm glad that they didn't, because it would totally destroy the downtown character that makes Littleton famous. That may be true in other areas where they might, down at Mineral or whatever, if they want to do that, but I just don't see that here.
My personal feeling is that TIZ just added another layer of bureaucracy on top of what we had, and I don't think that it's a necessary tool.
TIZ was a state issue, wasn't it? Or was it just strictly municipal? It was just us?
It's just us.
Other people did it.
Okay. I got the impression it had something more to do with RTDs.
I actually recommend that the TIZ around the mineral station be eliminated, because it serves no useful purpose, so, that
Back when
doesn't.
the light rail came in, I remember looking at other stations in other cities and other states and saying, do you want your downtown to look like anywhere USA? So they would say, look, you get off the train here, you could be in Milwaukee. Because it didn't matter. And what they said, no, we want this to be unique to Littleton. So when you get off the train, you know you're in Littleton. You're not downtown Denver or whatever.
I guess just in sort of this context, I mean, what's your guys' perspective on what do other communities do vis-a-vis a PDO process? I mean, do you have any visibility to what goes on? Just we're out of curiosity.
I haven't really checked on that, so honestly, I don't know. I mean, they all have different types of overlay plans, but I don't know about anything that are specific.
To do what we talked about, is kind of combining it, because what we have is a process, a series of processes that have been piecemealed over the years, and just added on as they were needed. So most communities kind of step back and say, how do we combine all these things? And kind of what Julio was talking about is, there's great things in the CA, great things in TIS, great things in PDO, but we don't need all of that. It can all combine into zoning, where you actually go through and say, what do we want to achieve and how do we do it, and just combine it into a single set, much simpler, and figure out how you want to review it.
Well, to speed this along, I'll make a motion and then we can see if we want to go that direction. And that is that I move that we refer the PDO code to the Planning Commission for suggested changes, with special attention to, number one, approval by council of PDO on standard zoning, and number two, process for changes in the TIS. And this would be, my intent here is that we give this to the staff and the Planning Commission to look at what should happen to the PDO. I'd like to split it into two different processes, a PDO process and, if we still need a TIS or downtown process. I'm angling to get the PDO that is an overlay on standard zoning approved by council. But I want the Planning Commission to look at, and the staff to look at, both of those processes and to come back to us with recommendations. Jan was talking partially, or one of the things that Jan was talking about is, why do we have a TIS down in Mineral? Because it doesn't apply to anything. And that's a very valid point, because it doesn't, other than the Carson Nature
Well,
Center.
and the TIS we have up on the downtown station is funny because, the real intent of that was to look at development downtown, and yet when you deal with this radius thing, I mean, there's a corner of Woodlawn Shopping Center that's in the TIS.
Yeah.
The way the code is written now, if it's even touching the TIS, it goes under the same criteria. And so we've got outlying properties that are clearly not downtown that are still being subjected to these standards. And I think it's time to look at it again.
And as a way of discussion, I was originally, up until about 20 minutes ago, heading down the direction that the TIS part of the PDO process probably shouldn't even go to Planning Commission. I would be happy with it going through DRC. However, as I was thinking about it, it may need to go to Planning Commission so that DRC has that bargaining chip to use with the developers. And Peggy brought up one example in the code is how do you define substantial benefit to Littleton? Well, that ends up being a bargaining and debate issue between the DRC and the developer. And, one of the things the DRC can always say is, well, if you don't believe us, you can take it to the Planning Commission. And that does give them a little bit of
Hit it right on the nail on the head.
It does give them a little bit of negotiation. So after thinking about this as we're talking, I'm not sure that the right thing to do is to not have it go to the Planning Commission. But I think that my opinion is that PDOs as an overlay on standard zoning should go to the council. I think we should look at the whole TIS concept. Do we need to replace a half-mile radius with something that's specific for downtown? How do we want to handle downtown development? If you take the example of the Nevada Place, I think you probably have a better development than what you would have had if they had just developed as R5. And the PDO process probably drove them in that direction. So if we don't do that downtown, we need something like that. But I think the proper thing to do is give this back to the Planning Commission and the staff, have them look at what changes they all think need to be made, bring it back to us.
Okay, would
With
you
some
read the
suggestions.
motion again the way it is?
The motion is to refer the PDO code to the Planning Commission for suggested changes with special attention to, number one, approval by council of PDO on standard zoning, and number two, process for changes in the TIZ.
I think Jim had his hand up, and then
Good.
To do an overlay of the existing PDO would require a public hearing. Would your motion allow the public hearing to be held only with city council and not have to do 2 public hearings?
If that's what ultimately came back, that might be one of the suggestions. I personally feel a little uncomfortable bypassing Planning Commission on anything to do with land use and planning. And part of my goal was to try and simplify a little bit the process for development downtown, because what we're having happen right now is if you hit 500 square feet of renovation, then you trigger this PDO process, which to me seems a little onerous. So part of the question is how do you hook in things like Nevada Place, which you really want to go through the process, but how do you exclude people that just want to renovate a portion of the building that really shouldn't have to go through the whole process? So part of my intent, and what I'm hoping is picked up, is that in areas where we can simplify the process or make it less onerous. And I don't know, maybe you keep it and change the square footage from 500 to 2,000 or something. I don't know what it is, but...
Well, the issue, if it goes to Planning Commission and they make some sort of recommendation that would come on to council for us to just consider it a public hearing, there's nothing that says we have to follow what they're recommending anyway. So you're putting not only the developer, but you're putting citizens through 2 different kinds of public meetings that may have absolutely diametrically opposite results. And I think that you're better off just having a single public hearing.
Okay. Yep.
John, on the Nevada Place, is it the fact that they're in the TIZ that triggered the PDO for them? So if we eliminate the whole TIZ thing, then they would have had to go through the design review.
Well, if we didn't have a TIZ at all, they would have done a site development plan through the Development Review Committee.
So at that point, the downtown design standards would have kicked in.
Yeah, if we had the design standards but not the PDO process, yeah.
Right, so if there's no PDO process, because if they weren't in the TIZ, it wouldn't have triggered a whole PDO, and they would have gone through a standard.
The only thing is, though, is that they wouldn't have been able to increase their height and modify those setbacks
Without,
the PDO overlay.
so they would have had to go to a rezone?
Well, they might have had to done a PD overlay anyway, or a rezone, yeah. Or gone back and done the PD overlay regardless of the TIZ to
Or
try to
did
ask
an
for
exception?
variation.
We've done something like that.
It would have either had to have been a PDO or a rezone,
Okay.
yeah.
In theory,
Couldn't have gone.
you can't vary zoning requirements, although, is it Board of Appeals or Board of Adjustment? Which one? I never can remember.
Well, the Board of
Is it
Adjustment.
adjustment? Yeah, although
They would
in
have-
theory, adjustment can do some of that.
Well, but it's all based on hardships,
Yeah.
and that, well, yeah,
Yeah, and it's hard to claim you have a hardship on a brand new building
Yeah.
you're proposing.
yeah, so. But,
Peggy?
I like what the motion's generally trying to do, but I'm not real comfortable with use of the phrase special attention. I'd like them to attend to that, But I also, based on some of what we were hearing, think that they may have some other views of things that might be, I don't know, more important even than that, I don't know. So since we have several of the commission here tonight, although one is ending his term, but since we have several here, they've heard the sense of the discussion, and I would like to take out the words special attention and substitute including. But before I make a motion, maybe you would comment on that.
Well, my intent was not for this to be, let's see, what's the legal term? Examples but not exclusive. How do you do that?
Inclusions, but not exclusions? Is that what you mean?
I'd like them to look at these two particular items, but if they have other suggestions that they want to bring, then I don't intend for this to be exclusive to say that those are the only two things they can look at, but I want them to look at those two aspects along with whatever else it is.
Well, can we get a sense of the people that are here if they understand that? Is that acceptable?
Sure.
We have two new people and
I want
one...
the two new people to talk.
Or even, well, two new and two existing.
For me, it's clear that you're looking for a recommendation from the board, not to pay attention of those two items, but to also open up an opportunity to bring other recommendations and other facets to review.
So as long as we have that sense, the Planning Commission's been through quite a bit in the past few years, so they've developed some insights and things that I hope they and staff would share to say this is a...
I should think that they are intimately familiar with downtown.
Would you? Okay.
Jim?
Well, Karina just brought it up, looking at other things perhaps. Should they take a look at how the CA zone is fitting into what you're trying to get changed?
Well, we can broaden it and say, look at R5 and CA, because I think the only two, those only appear in downtown, don't they?
No, they don't.
Even R5?
There's R5s elsewhere in the city.
What about CA?
There's some, some, not
Okay.
much, but down Santa Fe there's some.
I mean, you can get into that. That ends up being complex, and if they want to bring back a suggestion on that, I'm willing to listen.
As long as it's applying to the downtown, not necessarily to the areas of...
Well, that's my main concern is what drove me here is I see there being two distinct, different reasons for what we currently use a PDA. One is an overlay of standard zoning, and the second is to get our hooks in development that's happening in the TIS. So for me, those are two different functions that ought to be split into different sections of code. And along with that, I think that the overlay to standard zoning ought to come to council. Because I think when you're changing building heights, when you're potentially changing densities, lot sizes, building heights, setbacks, minimum open space, that's all the stuff that's called out in standard zoning categories. So if you're going to allow all that to be changed without going through a normal zoning hearing, then what's the point of doing that?
But I believe the CA zone also includes a floor area ratio formula as well.
Well, when you get into commercial stuff, yes, there are floor area ratios and there are other categories. But so that's what drove me to this point. But there's other issues like, should we have a TIS? If we're going to do a TIS, is it right to have a half-mile radius? If we're going to do a TIS, should it apply to mineral or not apply to mineral? So there's a number of other aspects that are related around this that I'm more than willing to hear back from the Planning Commission, but what really drove me to this was wanting to split the function, the two different functions that I see that we have folded into Chapter 9, which is called Plan Development Overlay. That's what's driving me to this, and in the process of doing that and splitting it into two different functions, I can see there being a lot of attention applied to the second function, which is the TIS, what do you do with downtown, what kind of hooks do you want in there, who does the approval process, how does that all work? So, Bill?
Yes. I'm going to maybe put commentary just in adding to this that certainly I would expect consideration coming from the commission, so it's somewhat obvious. Impact on predictability for developers, overall time frame, and certainly benefit to the city as considerations in whatever comes forward. At least that's kind of a heads up. Those are some things that would be part of my consideration for it. Other areas that you might look at, particularly when we're talking about TIS, is what's happening with other areas with regard to TODs and urban center designations that deal with some of the transportation nodes that exist around some of the other areas. Knowing we want Littleton to be different, but also what are they doing? Because some of them are also interested in preserving some levels of uniqueness that they have as well.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
I don't know if this has any concern with this particular thing. However, years ago, when a building was put in, you went floor to ratio, they had some type of a ratio, especially for restaurants, that you had to adhere to in order to get your business license. And that seems to have gone away, and especially with the historical preservation district amendment that says they can reduce their parking by 50%. I think we've shot ourselves in the foot because of the fact that these people come in and say, oh, we're going to make an improvement district. And I can't tell you how many improvement districts we've started since 1966. And everything goes well until you get to the dollar figure, and that's it. Everybody said, well, maybe we got to think this over. But I think that's a big issue in downtown, and it has a lot to do with the fact that we haven't had to stick by it.
I agree that the parking regulations probably do more to hinder development downtown than any other thing we have. And I personally think that that's the next priority that I'm hoping the council will ask the planning commission to look at. But I think what we decided after the breakfast is we're going to wait until we get the draft comp plan and before we actually do a different tasking or an additional tasking or something else like that. I agree with you. I think parking regulations need to be looked at. We need to figure out some solution to them. Bruce?
Maybe to Phil's point, did you have a sense of what the time frame would be in terms of getting a deliverable back as far as recommendations are concerned?
Yeah, it's, what, 8:45 now?
Excellent.
It's, my expectation sitting here right now is that this could happen somewhat expeditiously, but having not gotten into the details, we may find out that it takes the Planning Commission a while to work through the details. So I think it comes back when it comes back.
A year.
I'll add to the commentary that knowing that there's been struggles in the past would suggest that the process be one where as a first step, the Planning Commission feeds back what they heard as the charge, maybe some of their at least initial thoughts around that before they run off and maybe do a lot of work, and they can be doing that in conjunction with staff, but come back and say, here's what we heard as the charge, as a first step.
Bruce?
I like that, but I'd almost take another step and maybe say, even put a finite timeline on it and say, look, we'd like to get a report back, and even if it's partial, if it's some recommendations, pick a date, 6 months, at least that sort of keeps the process moving forward. I mean, it can always be expanded or whatnot if we need to, just throwing that out.
Shan, what do you think is a reasonable time frame? Because part of this is going to depend on staff's workload. Part of it's going to depend on what the future projects are that are going to the planning commission and will come up to the planning commission. Got any idea?
And dealing with the comp plan.
Yeah, and we still have some stuff left with the comp plan too.
Well, the comp plan does have some recommendations that are specific to this as well, so we can build that into it.
Or Dennis, what do you think?
I was thinking a report back in 6 months sounded okay.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's reasonable.
I mean, not having it done in 6 months, but at least having a report back on, where we are and, looked at,
I do have a concern that so much expertise, or at least experience, is retiring from, or ending on the commission. I mean, Julio, how many thousand years have you been on?
Oh, way too
But, so I'm hoping, can only suggest that the commission might debrief a little bit with the people who are leaving, who have gone through 47 different projects or whatever, a lot more than that. But anyway, to debrief a bit, about that. That's all I would suggest.
Or you
because
can come back as a consultant.
At the same fabulous pay that you were getting as a plan.
Yeah, we'll go to switch.
Might even double it.
We'll double it.
All right, further discussion on the motion? All in favor, raise your hands. Everybody's unanimous. Okay. Next item on the agenda was discussion on the permit process for community development. And I think that's Phil.
Well, I'm going to start off and tell Jan, thank you. At least packaging together these outlines of the flow charts for the various different processes is something that Jan had prepared by the council's workshop in 2010. So we're getting at least a chance to have more of what I'll call a public review of that, and giving Jan a chance to walk through these with us, so that indeed we have an awareness of some of the permitting process that exists. Recognize there are perspectives, viewpoints, and realities that exist out in the committee that are out in the community of developers that will be quite disparate. Folks will say Littleton's one of the best places to do work with, and we really enjoy it. They know their stuff, and everything's coming together. And then, as with always, there's a minority that will say, geez, what are you guys trying to do? It's a terrible place to try and get some things done. I think there's also an item that there's a corollary between how much homework they do and the quality of work that they do when they start the process, and how far that goes, and how much work is actually done by the developer, by the architect, by the project, and the quality of that work in working through the process. What my hope was in doing is at least increasing my awareness of the permitting process, the stages of that, and having that awareness and getting an airing of that by the council so that we have some understanding of what it is that folks have to go through and have to experience.
I guess the question is, did you prepare a test?
No. But I could, no.
Was that to be specifically designed for you?
Yes, actually, I'd have to study.
And with that, I don't want to hold Jan back.
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, there's some basic similarities of our process with all applications that we get in the door. And I'll mention those first. I mean, we start everything with a pre-submittal meeting with staff, and that's held weekly with the planning staff and engineering staff to describe the processes, to discuss the project with the applicant, to discuss the processes and requirements of what they need to submit, and also give them some insight as to some major issues that we just know off the top of our heads regarding that property. And then after the pre-submittal meeting, they make their application. And all applications go through some type of referral process. Sometimes it's just within the city, depending on the type of application. Sometimes it involves outside agencies if it's a subdivision or a rezoning case. And always they end up going to DRC because the Development Review Committee makes the recommendations to the City Council and the Planning Commission on subdivision plats and rezonings and conditional uses, and they make final decision on final on-site development plans. So that's kind of the basic. We got the pre-submittal, you got the application, you do the referral, it goes to DRC, and then these charts all differ when it comes to further processes involved that require public hearings and all. So that's sort of the basics of our processing. Now, do you want me to just take you through each one of these flow charts, or?
No.
Or? Okay, and I would like to ask if there's anything, when you guys look at these, that doesn't make sense or is confusing or whatever, I welcome the criticism because I've been processing these applications for 20 years, and so I kind of can do it in my sleep. So to write something for people that never done this to understand the process is, I know what it is, so if it's confusing or it needs more explanation or you have any recommendations that can make this better, I appreciate that. So our simplest process is the site development plan because it is administrative and it doesn't involve public hearings. And so it starts with the pre-submittal meeting.
Wait a second. Let us get to the...
I switched things around. I thought I'd start with the simplest one first. So if you pull out the site development plan application.
Okay. Is that
These aren't in order of...
Is that the one that says conditional use application?
No, it's the one that actually
It's
says
next to the
site
last if you
development
kept
plan
in
at the
order.
top.
It says 4 to 6 months in parentheses.
It's close to the back.
Yeah, it is, actually.
Got it. One suggestion, either page numbering or page references would be good.
Well, we start with the pre-submittal meeting, and like I put in here, if 6 months has elapsed, and there's actually nothing in the code that requires the 6-month thing. It's just a kind of a common sense thing. If 6 months has elapsed since they had the pre-submittal meeting, we usually recommend they have another one, just refresher for everybody. And it's not a big deal anyway, so it's usually pretty helpful. Then they make the application that gets submitted, and then staff schedules it for the DRC meeting about 4 to 6 weeks out from that application period. It gets sent out for referral to staff, city staff, and occasionally an outside referral depending on the case. And then it goes to and actually I back up. The first application that comes in is the conceptual site plan. The site plans are processed in 2 stages. One is the conceptual site development plan, and the second is the final site development plan. So they submit a conceptual site development plan. It goes to review, and then it goes to the DRC. And the thing about the conceptual site plan is helpful because It actually gives the developer the opportunity to get a technical review done to some degree, sit down with the Development Review Committee and city staff to review his project and issues. So they get a feeling of some, major league things that they may need to deal with, on how practical this is going to work for them and what they need to deal with before they actually do the final site plan, which involves a lot more engineering and architecture and more expense that way. So the conceptual site plan gives them a chance to kind of find out, if this is going to really work for them, if this is going to be real, or some major league issues that could be big stumbling blocks before they put out a lot of expense.
Jan, knowing that some of us are lay people, is conceptual site development plan and final site development plan terms of art that have a pretty good definition to a developer, or is it something that's fuzzy?
It's pretty clear to them because they do this, and they've dealt with this process in other jurisdictions. It's pretty similar. I also have an application packet that explains all this, and it has the different application requirements for each of the processes so that they have an idea of what is required on each one of those plans.
So in other words, they'll know if they look at the application what's needed.
And plus we explain it in our pre-submittal meeting too. So anyway, then they meet with the Development Review Committee with the conceptual site plan, and then they get that input back with the technical requirements of things that need to be addressed and changed. And then the next step is that they come back and submit their application for their final site development plan, and it goes through the same process, the conceptual. It gets scheduled 4 to 6 weeks out for DRC. It goes through a review process with different staff people. Then it goes to DRC as a final site plan review. And once DRC's approved that, then they work with staff on getting different things clarified and finished up and finalized before they go to Mylars on the site plan to record, and then turn in for building permit review.
The timeline here of 4 to 6 months, you're saying this is more or less one of our more straightforward processes?
Well, in the 4 to 6 months it's 6 months is probably very much on the long side. I mean, in all reality, some of these actually take a lot less than that. I mean,
I guess that's what I would...
Yeah, this is, we have this site plan flow chart here applies to a building addition, and it applies to 6 building apartment development. So, I mean, and we explain this up front at the pre-submittal meetings. I mean, there's, like, for instance, I have a building addition scheduled for DRC on Thursday for Denver Seminary. And that's probably going to take 2 months tops, because it's a very simple, and I know DRC is not going to officially want to see it again as a final site development plan, and that happens quite often in some cases that are simple like this. So they're going to go to DRC with the conceptual, maybe / final site plan on Thursday, and after that day, they're going to be working with planning and engineering staff just to get their documentation finished up and recorded. And I can tell you that process probably took 2 to 3 months.
But I think that's important. I mean, I guess if they're, and I don't know what level of communication you have as far as, hypothetically, if you guys have a binder or an instruction sheet that says if you do these 8 things, you'll get approval in 6 weeks. If you don't do these 8 things, your 6 weeks may turn into 4 months. I mean, it strikes me that on this, like you're saying, I mean, the biggest delay here seems to me to be how often DRC meets.
Well, DRC meets 3 times out of the month.
Yeah.
And this when it's scheduled 4 to 6 weeks, it doesn't mean because DRC is not available. It's because staff has queued up, exactly, queued up. And
well, all I'm going for here is I think this is great, but any internal process attributes from your guys' perspective that could shorten timelines to make it easier for people to get these
Well,
projects
we,
through?
you know, we don't, well, this is giving you the long, straight process. In all reality, like I give you this example, Denver Seminary, this is not taking them 4 to 6 months. It's taking 2 to 3 months because we look at each individual project and its complexity, and I think we're pretty reasonable about it.
You know, and also, Bruce, there's things we control and we don't control.
Exactly.
Pearls, I mean, some people are better than others, some people have...
Right, and the other thing that's built into this is getting response back from the applicant.
No,
And sometimes that can be months.
So,
Don't misread that, I guess,
Yeah.
you're always going to get slowed down by, if they don't want to move it forward quicker, I totally get that. But the balance, I was sort of just,
Well, to make you feel better, if something comes in that's simple like this Denver Seminary thing,
yeah.
I'm not going to sit there and go, gee, I'm going to this is going to get drug out for 6 months because that's what this says, and that's not what, I wouldn't do that, you know, yeah.
Okay.
if I'm understanding it correctly, Jan and Phil, somewhere in the pre-submittal meeting, you can give the applicant an idea of the time frame, and if I'm hearing it correctly on the Denver Seminary modification that's coming through, that you're actually, in this, you're skipping boxes 2, 3, 4, and 5, and essentially going from the pre-submittal to the second application submission. But they're meeting some level of criteria that
They're being responsive.
and you're addressing that in the pre-submittal meeting, giving them an idea of the time frame with the expectation that they're going to hit that. Now, if for some reason their application doesn't come in with that, when would you, if it didn't hit that expectation, when would you let them know? When they submit the application, or?
It depends. Sometimes when they submit the application, if they've submitted an incomplete application, and then sometimes it will happen if they've submitted a complete application, but when we're reviewing it, we start finding that there's some issues that they need to, and lots of times this usually comes out with like drainage issues or something engineering related.
Did you guys identify? You would have to
Yeah,
identify
our
those.
engineers identify, yeah.
So it could go to, if I'm taking this as an example, you go from box 1 to box 6, it gets to box 7, and you realize something's incomplete, it might bounce back to box 3 or 4.
Yeah, but it's, just to give you one instance, it did have happen with us a little bit. They've made a change. I found out last week that they've made their footprint bigger on their addition. So the architect contacted me and stuff like that. Well, that's not going to change our review that much. And engineering hadn't finished their review yet, so I'm not bumping them back. They're still scheduled for Thursday. So it really kind of depends on what the...
But it could depend on what it is. But when that would become evident during the referral.
Yeah.
Okay, so, that's when it might bump back to a prior box.
Well, and usually the thing of it is when, and the way this process is, if they're going through a conceptual review, these things come up during that review. And that doesn't necessarily delay the conceptual review of the DRC. That's just another item that gets discussed and that they have to address with the final site development plan, so.
But part of this is time and money have a relationship. And the money to us is budget. So part of this is if we don't like the 6 months, the 4 to 6 months, part of our answer is to spend more money, to apply more resources to the process, to make the process shorter. So part of what we're finding out is this is what it takes approximately to go through the process based on the staffing levels that we have. And we're going to find the same thing out with building inspections and most of the other stuff that we have is it's partially related to budget.
Well, and it certainly, that's an element of it, I guess. The beauty of going through the flow chart is multiple eyeballs looking at the same thing to sort of say, well, is box whatever something that actually has to, it could be process improvement that is streamlined because it's not much of a value add. I mean, it's both. I think there's certainly resource issues, but there could be process streamlining issues too. I don't know.
And I think what you're striving for is, at what point in time does the community development department look at the process
Yeah.
to evaluate the efficiency of the process and changes that could be made?
As part of this exercise.
Well, as part of this exercise or as some other exercise. And part of the answer to that has been, and we're getting a little off topic, but part of the answer to that is we've been doing this rotating thing going through the departments, police, fire, library, places like that. And so that's one point where that happens. It doesn't necessarily have to wait until that point, but I know what you're driving at is, how often and when do we sit and look at what it is that we do? Does it make sense to continue to do that, and does it make sense to continue to do that in this fashion?
Exactly.
Just trying to understand the process first, 'cause then you get into who's reviewing it at what level, and who has, where's the decision being made, and do you have areas where things are cycling, as much for administrative stamping, for lack of a better term, as opposed to actual decisions being made or work being done.
I can remember working at Martin where we started off, if you wanted to work overtime, it took 2 signatures on the overtime request, and within 8 months that went up to like 10 signatures on the overtime requests. Now, part of that was probably a deliberate ploy to prevent people from requesting overtime, but part of it was, once you start a process, then everybody wants to get an approval. They had some processes that were really approval heavy.
Still a few.
Should start working 5 or 6 either.
Well, I'll just say that, if it can be streamlined, we do. I mean, we look at the cases differently, because like I said, this is set out for the generic case, and so, and also, as far as the setting the DRC meeting date, a lot of that has to do with the other, like engineering's review and stuff and their timeline. I can't control, community development, this is our process, but we can't always control the timeline necessarily, because there's other departments reviewing that may have other stuff going on and other projects, because we don't have a huge engineering staff, just like we don't have a very big planning staff, and so.
And Jan, not being as familiar with the process, when you send it out for referral, is there a certain list that it goes out to?
Yes.
Because I know with SSPR&D, they, when they're doing a project on, depending on
Well, they're
what
one
it
of
is.
the people.
Well, I know they also receive referrals,
Yeah.
but when they're doing
No,
projects, they have a certain list and they
For
keep track of that.
site plans, it's, engineering, traffic engineering, landscape architecture, fire department, police department, city manager's office. We have a list of about 10 to 15 people that all the site development plans go to. And then on a case-by-case basis, there may be an outside referral agency that gets something. And I have a huge contact list of all the outside referral agencies that we send things to.
I'm
And
glad we don't typically deal with SEMS ones.
Anything else?
no, on site plans, unless you guys
Uh,
have any more questions.
When it goes out with referral, do you give them a time frame, or do they give you back a time frame? Or
No,
is there a standard?
we give them a time frame of, I give them a time frame on this, like 4 to 6 weeks, so they at least have 30 days to review. And being a receiving end referral, I can tell you Douglas County does not give us 30 days to review things.
I know.
So,
What do they do?
sometimes it's a week. Yeah, it's been kind of interesting, but 30, and with the, it's usually a 30-day referral.
For internal folks, do they need that long?
Engineering does,
It depends.
it depends, and engineering usually does, but,
I mean, you're going to have a whole lot of people are out, sick, things fall apart, you get focused on expression, you do something in 1 week,
Yeah.
something Charlie has on, I think, at least when I was with BRC and then CD, I have to say staff, is really conscious of the fact that when someone says, this is a simple project, can you kind of push this through? And it gets that way, because it's simple. It doesn't need to just sit at the bottom of the pile just because there's a pile there that's simple. They can maybe pull them out like the engineers and they can look at them real quickly. But they're always balancing, they're always back and forth. And the beauty of what we have is you got engineering and planning all right there. All right there on the floor. So they're walking in and out and talking to each other all the time.
Good.
The other thing with engineering is they have their own projects. If they have a street construction project, something else, that really takes priority over some other things. So it really kind of delays the other process.
And I think the communication back to the applicant is where I think we do a better job, is that we communicate back, hey, it's going to take us a little longer, we've got X going on. Usually, you can speak to more than I can. They understand, as long as you're communicating with them.
Yeah, we always communicate with them, so.
When we say we're always communicating with them, do we have like a 1 week touchback or 48-hour touchback? Or?
We get the cell phone
Well,
call.
yeah, I don't, well, like when I get the application in, they get notified when the meeting is. When I get comments in, I get them to them as soon as I get them. I don't initiate a contact all the time with the applicant. A lot of it is, they call, I return the call. Or if I find that I need something, I have a question on the review, I call them up and talk to them about it. But we don't do like just a standard check-in with you weekly thing. It's just communicate, return phone calls, but not like what you just suggested.
And I want to sort of chime in on Phil's point, but ask a question. I think my impression is that exactly as you say, I think the fact that staff is trying to communicate and is being responsive and is being flexible is a huge value add. Because I've dealt with communities where you get to the bottom of the pile, and when it shows up at the top of the pile is when you're going to get dealt with, in terms of opening stores and stuff, and it's painful. And I get the impression very much so that staff tries to minimize or mitigate that amount of pain. Question I wanted to ask was just in terms of the whole communication side of this thing, is there a way to track any of this stuff so that it's done online and somebody, for example, can just log in and see what the status of something is as opposed to having you guys call back and forth? Have we ever talked about anything like that? Do we do it?
Well, we got the e-track-it on now.
It's a possibility.
That's a possibility. I haven't
It's-
gotten active with
It's
it.
the next level of where we want to go.
No,
with
the
e-track.
one
I would think that would just,
The one thing about here is that it's small. I mean, you have two planners doing cases. This isn't Jefferson County that's got 50 planners
That's
and
true.
nobody talks to each other. We're real small and informal, and I think we have good communication with our applicants because it is. I mean, I probably talk to them once a week or on some issue or something. But
Well, to put this in perspective, we hear comments all over the range from, Hilton is the worst place in the world to deal with, we're great, but the Mercedes dealership, one of the things that they said repeatedly to me was that we were fabulous to work with, that it was a very smooth process.
Norgren said the same thing.
They were very pleased. Norgren said the same thing. Mission Hills said the same thing. So we hear over and over again that people are pleased with the time frame of the process. Now, when we had the car dealers in, the guy for Cooney, not Cooney, is it Cooney?
Oh,
was
yeah,
going-
that's right.
No, but is it Cooney that's going on?
McDonald.
Don?
No, the one that's going to Greenwood Village.
Oh, Cooney.
And he was complaining, but he wasn't complaining about the time frame for the approval process. What he was complaining about or the requirements that came with development that he thought didn't happen to him in Centennial. And I'll be curious to see what he thinks of the process going through Greenwood Village. But
I'm sure that would be nice.
I can't remember anybody complaining in the near past about the time frame for going through the process. It doesn't mean that there isn't somebody out there that feels that way, but most of the feedback that we've had in the recent past is people are pleased with how long it takes to get through the process.
You guys made that distinction, for sure, right? When you just say the process doesn't work, what part doesn't work? The other comment I've heard too is just how pleasant it's got. I mean, there's some places that aren't, there are some places that aren't as pleasant. They bend over to do whatever they can to, accommodate anything they can. Let's say that Dan is right. It's small. It's personal.
It's small and personal.
Sounds like an ad.
Yeah.
Well, and part of it is, though, I mean, it's like everything else. Is there an application of technology that would make it more, would result in efficiency for staff that would be beneficial for everyone? I'm not saying.
We can look at it.
We just ask it.
We just haven't done it yet. And we have the system in place. It's going back to, again, what is the value added by doing that? We'll look at it.
Cost better.
We'll look at it.
I don't know. I keep in pretty good email contact with my applicants, and
Right.
I've never felt like anybody's been dissatisfied with it. In fact, I'm going to toot my own horn, but I have actually heard more often good things about processing with the city and dealing with the staff, and I've heard bad things. And I just.
There are processes, too, that are a lot larger, like when we did Marathon. That was a marathon. I mean, it was meeting after meeting. Twice we did it. And I think at one point, we didn't do it electronically, but we, like Jan said, we were constantly back and forth with emails, and that was a very frustrating process from our side to look at them, the way they at times were negligent in getting stuff to us timely.
Sometimes you have too many cooks in the soup, too, on the other hand, so.
All right, next one.
Well, the next one I thought I'd stick, and these are probably not in order that you have, unfortunately, but since they're similar to the site plan, I thought I'd go to the conditional use applications. There's the conditional use, it's 2 pages, and that's with the site development plan. And then there's another flow chart for conditional use with the sketch plan. And so if we start with the conditional use with the site plan, it's
Which one you sketching? Which one?
the site plan, the one with the site development plan. It's 2 pages. I ran out of room. Yeah. And this is, I have a 6 to 8 months, and I just want to tell you the 6 to 8 months, I mean, we probably put larger months on there, mainly because we're trying to cover probably your worst case scenario, the thing that's going to take the longest time frame. And with this, we start with the pre-submittal meeting again. Since this is a public hearing, we recommend after the pre-submittal and before they submit a formal application that they do neighborhood outreach with the neighbors. Then they submit their application, and the conditional use applications do require, at one point, they all required a site development plan to be submitted with them, whether they were an existing structure or an existing structure that was going to need addition on, or if it was going to involve building a new building. And that site development plan basically kicked in, bringing the entire property in compliance with the code. And that got to be problematic in situations, which I think I described to you all last year in an ordinance that I took to modify that requirement for shopping centers that had a daycare in it that just wants to expand within the shopping center. I just did a doggy daycare last week with Planning Commission in an existing building. So we modified the code to require sketch plans for those type of developments, conditional uses, and I'll cover that on the next flow chart. This one with a site development plan would be a conditional use that would be building a new structure or putting an addition on to an existing structure that would require a site development plan regardless of whether it's a conditional use or not. So they submit a conceptual site plan with their conditional use application. It goes out to referral, especially with the conditional use. There will be probably some outside referral agency review. It's about the 4 to 6 week time period again. It goes to the DRC. DRC reviews that. And prepares a recommendation to Planning Commission. And sometimes there's another step in here that may happen or may not. Oh, wait a minute, I'm going the wrong way here. DRC meeting. Okay, they do a conceptual review and the conditional use application. They discuss issues with the applicant. If there's outstanding issues of discussion that need to be addressed by the applicant, then they do a revision, submit that again, gets reviewed again, goes back to DRC. That only happens if there's some issues involved that need to be reviewed again. Most times, not. Most times they're going to just go to DRC the one time, and DRC makes the recommendation to Planning Commission. And that's what happened with my doggy daycare. That's what happened with the daycare I had. Child daycare I had a month ago. They go straight, DRC just prepares a recommendation to Planning Commission, and it gets scheduled for a Planning Commission hearing. We do the staff report and the packet, and I gets delivered to Planning Commission, and we have the hearing, and they make their decision on the project. And in this case with the site plan, if it does get approved by Planning Commission, the next step is for the application for the final site plan. And this is the same referral process. We do a review of the final site development plan, then it goes to DRC, again, the final site plan approval, then the follow-up for recording, and then on to building permit. And this replicates basically what you just saw under the site plan flow chart. The conditional use application with a sketch plan is exactly the same process.
Before you leave that one, Jan, question. When coming out of the pre-submittal meeting, the suggestion is that they hold a neighborhood meeting. Does the city staff provide them with suggested contacts, or who they think should be included in that neighborhood input?
Yes, we do at the pre-submittal meeting. Actually take a look at the map and make suggestions on who's surrounding them and how far they might want to go out, or just based on our knowledge of interested parties or associations or something.
And they go out and do that. When it comes before the Planning Commission, is there then another opportunity for public input?
Yes.
And who takes care of the notification of the public for that hearing date?
Well, the city code requires posting of the property with a sign, and then the legal notice that we no longer use the newspaper, but we use the legal notice on the website and the postings on the city building and I think the courthouse and the library. I oftentimes, if they've had a neighborhood meeting, I personally oftentimes suggest to the applicant that they send them notice, since they already have the list of people, a courtesy notice of the hearing too. They don't have to do that, but I always suggest they do, because that might be a little strange if they were notified about a neighborhood meeting. Why was I notified about the meeting? So it's not a requirement by the code, but it's often suggested. The neighborhood meeting's not a requirement of the code either. That's also just a recommendation.
Thank you.
And then so when you go to the conditional use for the sketch plan, it's a little shorter period of time. It's the same application process all the way up to the planning commission hearing. And once the planning commission hearing is over with and that they've approved it, then that process is ended, other than just any kind of building permits that the applicant may need to get. But there's no final site development plan review and reporting, so this is a shorter process.
And what's the criteria that is different for a sketch plan versus a site development plan?
The sketch plan is if they're in an existing build, if the proposal's going to go in an existing developed property that's got an existing building, and they're not actually proposing to do anything to that property that would, under normal circumstances, require a site development plan. Site development plan, if you're not doing a conditional use, the site development plan is required if you're building a new structure or you're putting an addition on that's more than 5% of the existing floor area. And so if you've got a conditional use coming in that would require those things, then a site development plan would be required with that. The sketch plan, a sketch plan is only for properties that have a building that they're not going to be modifying as far as building onto or building a new structure. But the sketch plan is important for the planning commission to have, because when they're reviewing the conditional use, they also need to review to see what requirements of the conditional use are being met, and sometimes that's only can be demonstrated by drawing it on a sketch plan. So if it's showing play areas and how they're being protected from the traffic or something like that.
Or not?
Or not, yeah. Now the longest, let's see what I got to get this. We'll go to the plan, well, do you want to do the plan development overlay one, or rehash that one to death?
We've had that one.
Okay, I'm going to go then to probably our most complicated ones, which is rezoning applications. I have three different flow charts here, because we have three different types of zoning applications that basically go through the same process. They basically go the same process, but they're all called something different. We have somebody's wanting to rezone their property, like from R5 to B2 or something like that. It would fall under the rezoning application with official zoning map amendment, that flow chart. And this involves basically the two public hearing process. So we start with the pre-submittal meeting, the neighborhood meeting, of course, we recommend before they submit the application. They submit the application. It goes out for referral, and that's a bigger list. That's going to be the 10 to 15 people in-house that review it, in addition to sometimes even 20 referral agencies outside. My biggest referral list ever was Trailmark. I probably had 35 referral agencies on that list. So for a rezoning case, it's a lot more review. And then that gets scheduled for DRC 4 to 6 weeks from the submittal date. And DRC does their initial review of that application. And normally, it depends on the project. If this is a complicated zoning case, it's going to end up going back to DRC again after some revisions are made to the application. If it's a simple one, if it doesn't require that, then it won't go. It will go, and they can do the recommendation at the first meeting, then it will go scheduled straight for public hearing. So in these flow charts, I've always spelled out the worst case scenario, the longest process, and that would involve at least a couple of reviews. Just as a side depending on the project, something like Marathon, something like Alt Aspen Grove, any of these other, Alexan, more complicated critical zoning applications, they've come to DRC 3 times sometimes. We've had 3 meetings getting things sorted out and issues resolved. Another one that was several meetings was, the Enclave, that 10-acre property that Denver Water Board owns up in Belmar South. I mean, it's very controversial. So lots of times, those types of cases can go back to DRC at least twice, sometimes 3 times before it gets further on.
It's going back to DRC more times. Is that typically driven by the applicant, or is it the DRC itself, or is it coming out of referrals?
Well, sometimes sometimes it's a referral. Sometimes it's a referral. Lots of times it's just the meeting with the applicant and the DRC. I mean, there's some issues, and DRC's looking at that. Well, you're not really compatible with the neighborhood on these bases, and they're trying to make their argument. And it's basically kind of the back and forth.
This is
working the negotiation time.
This is negotiation that happens that is supposed to drive a better product through the whole process. So depending on how complex the project is and how bad it is to begin with.
So if they're not doing their homework, it's more driven by DRC.
It is,
or if
yeah.
they're greedy, or if they're,
I was using that as kind of not
Sorry.
doing their homework.
Well, I mean, DRC sometimes will sit there and go, well, we don't see how your application's meeting the comp plan, and if you want to get approved, by the council, you have a better chance of blah, blah, blah. And these are the things we think you can do to better address meeting comp plan. So then they go back and they redo this and that and add this and that and take 3 lots off or whatever and come back. And it's a negotiation that goes on between them. I mean, the applicant can clearly say, hey, I don't want to do this with you guys. I want to just go straight to hearing and take the recommendation he gets, That's the other option. But, they always want the more favorable one, of course, so, they do try to work it out. They're usually pretty agreeable.
Sunk money and they want to
Yeah,
see
so,
something. In referrals, I know South Suburban's had a number of times where they've had some significant surprises that have come out of referrals where an approval is needed. Most recently was with the Corps of Engineers. That just small little paved street going through South Platte Park. Do we have any experience with some big surprises coming out of referrals? Yet another one was Semswa around.
well, we can get a referral back from CDOT saying we won't grant access to an existing access was sitting there for years, and all of a sudden they're not going to allow it to stay open. We can get something like that, and that's why that first meeting is real important, because that's when you can find out these snafus. We've had that occasionally happen.
And sometimes we go back and we find out they wouldn't allow an access, and then we find out, oh, they will.
Well, actually, it happened more recently. It happened recently on the PD overlay for McDonald's. They weren't going to allow them to keep that right-in, right-out access off of Santa Fe.
Really?
And after much, discussion, they changed and said they'll let them keep it. So, I mean, we have this happen.
So
Never had it happen from South Suburban, though.
Oh,
Never. I mean, really, never.
I was talking about that with their projects.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because I have, probably a little more where they see the projects as they come to the board there.
So anyway, so then once it finally gets to the last part of DRC, where DRC's ready to make the recommendation, and that the applicant is, at this point agreeable to everything that the negotiations that have occurred, and we go ahead and we schedule it for Planning Commission. We have the public hearing of Planning Commission, and let's see. Then after the Planning Commission meeting, that recommendation gets forwarded to City Council, goes to the first reading, and then 2 weeks later with the second reading and public hearing, And then, of course, at the planning commission stage, they can recommend approval, recommend denial. They can also table it too. I mean, if they feel like they need more information, they can table the meeting. But our code is written so that it just can't go on tabling and tabling and tabling. I mean, the tabling actually has to be agreed to by the applicant to a date certain. So the applicant basically, if this comes up, he has a choice. He can either agree to table it to a date certain and come back, or he can just take the recommendation that the planning commission would give at that meeting. So, but they can't, a planning commission can't just table it to a date unknown, and they can't keep doing that without the applicant's consent,
So without the applicant's consent, the applicant could take what in effect would be a denial and in effect an appeal to the council.
Well, it would be a denied recommendation, because he doesn't make the planning commission doesn't make the final decision, so it's not really an appeal. But they could, I mean, if he's sitting there and planning commission's like, well, we're not ready to make a positive recommendation on this because we feel like we need this and that address, so we either table it till such and such date, and you can bring this back, and then so the applicant can either do that, or he can take a recommendation of denial to the council. So the applicant actually has a little control on that timing there. It's purposely written that way in the code so that it can't linger on forever without their due process going.
So in this process, Jan, if I have it correctly, there's a suggested input from the neighborhood, there's a public hearing with the planning commission, and as we go forward to the council, there's another public hearing.
Right.
How about planting next?
Pardon?
How about planting?
Okay, yeah, I'm not gonna go through these other two zoning cases because they're exactly the same process. One just happens to be a rezoning that involves a general PD plan. The other one happens to be an amendment to the general PD plan, which is a rezoning. So they're just all separated because it depends on the applicant I'm handing them out to because they're doing a certain application. We have two different types of plats. We have a minor subdivision plat and major subdivision plat. Minor subdivision plat, a plat could be a minor subdivision plat if, I believe, it's less than 10 lots, and if all lots are abutting a public street that's been dedicated and accepted, and if there's no waivers being requested to the subdivision regulations. That's a minor subdivision plat. Everything else comes under major subdivision plat. And the biggest difference between
Could you say that again? I kind of missed part of it.
A minor subdivision plat is a plat that a plat may be processed as a minor subdivision plat if it's less than 10 lots, all lots abut a public dedicated and accepted street, and if there are no waivers to the subdivision regulations being requested.
Can you explain that? Waivers to the subdivision?
Well, the waivers to the subdivision regulations might be a waiver to a street width or a waiver to the requirements of installing sidewalks along the streets. None of those are zoning related. It has to meet the zoning requirements. There's no variance relating to zoning. It would be all regulations that are required in the subdivision regulations, like building a street to a certain width, installing sidewalks to a certain width. Those are some of the examples.
And subdivision requirements are established where?
Well, property, in order to get a building permit for principal structure, property has to be platted.
But they're in Chapter 11, or Title 11.
I'm sorry, it's in Chapter 11. It's Title 11. Title 11.
So there's a set of subdivision requirements that are included in there?
Mm-hmm. And So we have the two, we have the minor and the major. And the major, I mean, the difference between the two, the application requirements are exactly the same. Both of them, the final plats for both of them go to the city council for approval. The big difference is that the preliminary plat for a minor subdivision plat is administratively reviewed and approved by staff. And the preliminary plat for a major subdivision actually goes to the planning commission for approval. So that's the big difference, is the preliminary plat, whether it goes to planning commission or is administratively approved. All the requirements are exactly the same that they have to submit. So, so the process for minor subdivision plat, we start with a pre-submittal meeting. We don't do a neighborhood meeting with those because these aren't zoning. This is, the zoning's already been established and the use has already been established and those impacts are known. And so this is just, the platting process is actually not a public hearing process. So there isn't a neighborhood meeting. They submit their application, it goes out for referral again, just like everything else. And with the plats, they have the bigger list of referral agencies because we do outside referral definitely on those. Then we have the DRC meeting that basically with the minor plat will review it and administratively approve the preliminary plat. And then the applicant submits the final plat, and that goes out for referral again. Then back to DRC for review before going to City Council. And the final plat usually includes some other documents like civil construction plans and subdivided improvements agreements and other easements and some other things that might be involved. That goes to DRC for final review and recommendation to City Council. And then that gets scheduled for the City Council meeting. It's not an ordinance, it's not a public hearing, but that goes to City Council for approval.
Just and as we've seen, there's been some, at least neighborhood input in all of the others. With platting, why no public hearing or neighborhood input?
It's not a public hearing. The zoning's already in place and
In theory, if the plat meets the subdivision regulations, then we can't turn it down. If they require waivers, then we can find that we'll approve the waivers and not approve the waivers. So if we establish the design criteria, if they meet the design criteria, then it's kind of straightforward. It's like there's no public hearing on building inspections either.
yeah, I mean, actually, the city code actually states that the subdivision regulations actually state that if the plat meets all the engineering and subdivision requirements, it actually says City Council has to approve it.
Because we define in advance what the design guidelines will be for the subdivision for the streets. So
Well, the thing is you went through the rezoning process that established the setbacks and the lot sizes and everything. So the plat has to meet the zoning that was put in place. And so that's, the public input occurred during the zoning.
What was our most recent one? Was that the 7-Eleven?
Yeah.
That was a plat. So if you remember that one, I think it was even on the consent agenda.
It might have been. It's very simple. And prior to that, the last plat I think you had before then, it was the Denver Water Board's property on Lowell and Bowles. So, and you had to be simple plats in lately, but, and then the major subdivision plat, like I said, it's exactly the same process, except for the planning commission meeting. There's the pre-submittal meeting, the application gets submitted, goes out for referral. The preliminary plat goes to the DRC. There's some follow-up and discussion, and then the application is submitted for, again, usually it's a revised preliminary plat addressing comments and issues that came out at the DRC meeting. That gets reviewed. Then it gets, DRC meets and makes their recommendation to the Planning Commission on the preliminary plat. It's scheduled for Planning Commission. And then I might just add too, just like with the site plan and stuff, if, sometimes the preliminary plat comes to DRC and goes through them one time. I mean, it depends if there's issues that need to be resolved and comes back to them a second time. I plotted out the worst case scenario here, so. But then the planning commission reviews the preliminary plat, and after that approval, the next step is for the applicant to submit the final subdivision plat application. And it gets reviewed and back to DRC again, and then it's been sent on for City Council. And actually, the preliminary plat referral is pretty extensive. It goes out to all the referral agencies and all. And then the final plat review doesn't go to all the outside agencies again, but it's an actually more intensive review for the city staff because you're dealing with civil construction plans, you're dealing with subdivider improvements agreements, and the plat, and so that's a lot more intensive review by staff. And then that goes to City Council under regular business, under general business, and then recorded. So.
It may be worthwhile to point out that sometimes developers will put plating issues on the general plan on the PD development because they want to get the waiver granted at the same time they're being zoned. So sometimes we'll see PD plans that come with street design on them. Street design is normally not decided during the zoning process. It's normally decided, it only conforms with the subdivision guidelines. But sometimes they will put a non-standard street design on the general plan for the zoning, because then if the zoning is approved, that basically grants them the waiver that defines that design for that particular street.
Yeah, because in some cases, the design of their street plays into the development of the property, obviously, and they like to kind of find that answer out early on. So there's been a lot of PD plans like that. Trailmark's one of them. Littleton Village, Marathon Property is one of them. So we've oftentimes had that happen. So, and Aspen Grove too. So. Any questions on that? I think we're down to
Board of
the
Adjustment.
simple one. Board of Adjustment. Very simple. There's no DRC. No, yeah, they do pre-submittal meeting. I don't do Board of Adjustment, or zoning official does, but they do pre-submittal meeting. They do the application submission. She does some referral out. I think it depends on what all the schools affected that she sends this to. And she does her staff report, and she makes a recommendation to Board of Adjustment, and they have their hearings on the third Thursday of every month, and those are pretty simple, actually. Those are usually setback adjustments or lot size adjustments or fences or something. Yeah. Pretty simple.
Thank you, Jane. These are very good charts. We appreciate the effort that you put into them.
So I would like to second that. But I have a comment and a question. I'll go with the question first. It's a silly question. How come the Planning Commission gets stuff a week early and council gets stuff 5 days early on these?
I don't have the answer to that one.
At some point, Planning Commission asked for that.
I think they
can't
asked for things like, they want their packets on Wednesday.
Yeah, so it was just a request by Planning Commission, maybe a year and a half ago to...
They get all their stuff a week early or just these kinds of things?
Usually public hearings, they get a week early.
Maybe we'd like to talk about that. Because I know if I want to go out to look at a property or something, we've only had a couple come before us, but it's good to have it a little sooner to get out there and...
Well, there's the Planning Commission meeting, and then the code actually spells out that, what's in here? It actually regulates when first reading is scheduled, I think. No, I think
Peggy's more referring to what would go out in a package.
Well, the
for-
thing is that usually the first reading is scheduled the week after the planning commission meeting.
Because it has the record.
So otherwise, you're going to be getting the packet before the planning commission hearing. And
Well, your planning commission's going to be on a Monday,
yeah.
and it would then come before council 8 days later.
In an ideal world, yes.
Yeah.
But if we're not having a regular meeting.
It depends on the regular meeting schedule, and it may depend on the staff time to write a communication that reflects what the planning commission recommendations are.
Usually, though, when we get stuff, we get copies of official minutes at those meetings.
And
that
that,
would mean there'd have to be a...
yeah, it depends on, how much the project is being rushed and how much staff time there is, because you're right, if it's a big meeting, then they have to do the minutes. Then in an ideal world, the minutes would be approved, although you may not want to wait for that to happen. So, in an ideal world, it can happen 8 days later, but probably most of the time it's not going to.
Okay, then, number one, I think we requested getting flow charts, and I did flow through all of these and read them really rigorously, and I appreciate the detail that's in here, but I would like to take you up on your offer for some rather detailed suggestions.
Okay.
I've tried to read them as somebody, well, it wasn't too difficult to read them as though I didn't know anything. And so, which more compares to the folks that you deal with. And so I have some suggestions that encompass everything, but I'd be glad to work on that. But the other thing is, it struck me that almost none of the boxes, none of what's in the little boxes is a decision. And in most flow charts, the value of flow chart is if you have decision points that you go in one branch or another branch or whatever. And it seemed to me this might be much more user-friendly, not in a flow chart format, but as a numbered sequence just down the page with the bold headings and the non-bold stuff under it, so that it's just a series of steps rather than snaking around on the page. And I don't know if the other council people feel that way or not. And I know that a lot of work went into getting it into this shape.
I guess I have a basic question. How else are these charts going to be used?
That's really
Because that's a lot of work that...
I think the intent of them was just so that people could see real easily the flow, the flow of the application process without having to read through all this.
But the flow could go right down the page without being in boxes.
Well, I think what we probably ought to do is figure out what we want to do with this, because, as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking it might be nice to put the code references where it's appropriate, like site development is, 10.7, plating is Title 11, that kind of stuff. But,
like up at the top here with the title, maybe?
yeah, or sometimes it may be appropriate to put that on a box. And, there's a lot of things that we can do with this, but we have to figure out who the audience is and what we intend to do with it.
Well, we hand them out with the application packet.
You really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, and then the other thing is how much time do we want to spend on them?
The other thing, they're also online, so people that are looking for the process can go online and find it, which I think helps.
Yeah, I have application packets and these online.
Great. Fabulous.
The only thing that I would maybe have as a suggestion to the online part is there's a lot of things that get elevated as concerns or not in that pre-submittal effort, and recognizing someone may not have that pre-submittal package before they might take a look at it, would be to have inclusive but not exclusive, not necessarily all of those items, but what are some of the things that actually come up in that pre-submittal meeting and what the outline is? And because coming out of that, you can give folks an idea of what their time frame is, or an idea of the complexity, and but it's also important that there's that pre-submittal package that they may not yet have seen.
Well, when they call, we talk to them initially, tell them, well, you need to come in and have a pre-submittal meeting. That application form and information is on the website. Plus, we hand it out to them. I've emailed it to many people. And it's got a little application form, and then the second sheet actually has kind of a little meeting outline note-taking thing that talks about process, what documents are required, like drainage and traffic studies, issues with comp plan, lighting. It has a whole list, and then has a general comment thing. And so, and those have been really helpful. We started doing those a few years ago, made them more formalized, so we had a record of them better, and it's been really helpful, actually.
And for some of the juicy interests, could you kind of say anecdotally how many pre-submission meetings go well, and how many pre-submission meetings you have an idea that there will be some challenges in the process? Maybe tell us a little bit about some of those. Don't have to name names, but.
I think most of them go pretty well, actually. I'm just trying to think of...
Maybe Raccoon Ridge.
Well, we didn't have pre-submittal back then.
Okay.
That's a whole nother animal,
So to speak.
so to speak. Yeah, we didn't have pre-submittal back then. I'm trying to think. They usually go pretty well. The ones that don't go well are the ones that just want to do a little addition downtown and they can't park it.
Yeah.
Those are the ones that I really hate. They want to do something nice downtown and they can't do it because they can't park it, so.
Parking regulations.
But honestly, I can't think of any that went really bad.
Jim?
Well, as I was going through these charts, and Jan, I do appreciate your effort putting them together, I was thinking that the thing that was missing to me was, when can they apply for a building permit? Because sometimes it's very clear, and sometimes it's not clear to me at which point in time they can apply for a building permit. And that was the only thing I saw that I would like to add.
I could add that into the site plan. They can apply for building permit after, I'll add that in. We usually tell them they have to have a Mylar submitted for the site development plan before they can apply for building permit. So I could stick that in there.
And that's true in all cases? Okay. I wasn't clear when I was
There's a good
going
reason
through
for that. We used to be nice and let them submit for building plan review during site plan review, and then the Walgreens got built, and it doesn't really match what the DRC approved. So we decided that wasn't a good idea to do anymore. So, and the turnaround in the building department is fairly quick. So we do require that they get all the way through DRC and have the actual Mylar of what was approved submitted before they can turn in the building plans. That way we're more assured that what gets turned in the building department is exactly the same thing.
All right, Council, anything else? Thank you, Planning Commission, for coming.
And again, thank you very, very much, Jan. Hopefully the exercise was helpful for you, too.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, but it needed to be done. I was kind of glad. It was one of those rainy day projects you never could get to, and then when y'all wanted it for, I thought, okay.